a job that you have is connecting those plays with the continued life? Are people applying to Yale, or how are those connections? And
yeah, that's something that I was just talking about in the last breakout group. I think at this point it's my job to do that, but the way that we do things at Yale, in terms of our commissioning and the development that we do at Yale, everything is incredibly flexible. So we have no actual set system or set, box that we put things in. So we don't have you can have this kind of workshop at this period of time. You hand in the draft and you get these 3 resources. We literally, craft it for wherever the writer is and wherever the project is at a certain point of time. So now extrapolating that out, that's sort of how we're trying to figure out what to do with the production enhancement fund too, right? So that every every play is different. It's even for each writer, one play they have is going to be very, very different than the other. So they're not necessarily going to want. So the partnerships we're not going to always have the same partnerships with just a few theaters, right? Any project could have a life at any number of theaters across the country, and definitely regional theaters, or because we're a regional theater, a LORT theater, there's that. There's theaters in New York. The first project that we commissioned and produced that came from the center was Robert Woodruff's version of Notes from Underground, and subsequent to that, the Production Enhancement Fund, we put money towards the production of it at La Jolla Playhouse, and then put money towards the production in New York. Now, producing at New Haven and producing in La Jolla and then producing in New York are very, very different things, right? So each circumstance, we put a different amount of money in. We had a different relationship with them, right? So we don't have. We're not grantors. We're not a fund. People don't apply to us for these grants. But this is all still very, very new. Yeah. So it's important for us to make sure that all of the artists who are commissioned by Yale Rep, that they understand that anyone who's commissioned by Yale Rep are eligible for these resources. It does not matter if this is the very first play that they've written, or if they've, sorry, I banged on the table. It does not, anybody who's a commissioned artist at Yale Rep has these resources available to them, and the journey for their particular play could be very, very different. So the success that we've had so far, the examples that we have so far, the Production Enhancement Fund, it's been organization to organization, us working directly with La Jolla, or with Theater for a New Audience, or with Berkeley in the public, or that kind of thing. But there's absolutely, we're open to the circumstance where we'd say to the playwright, if they wanted to go off to here, do you want to go produce yourself in New York? Great, here's some money. Or do you want to, is there are there theaters around the country that you have relationships with already that you want to build on? Are there theaters that you don't have relationships with that you want to? Are there particular, artists that you want to be bringing to the table here? So I'm hoping that just as the commissioning and the development process is really driven by our conversations with the artists and what they need at a particular point, that moving forward with the production enhancement part of this, they would be just as involved in it. But I want to echo something that I think Michael said in the last table, which is that I do think it's important for people organizations to be upfront about what they're bringing to the table. I mean, I think the partnering between organizations, we're all structured very differently than each other, and I think there's a great amount of goodwill and good intention behind sort of networking and bringing all of our resources together. And yet some of us are big institutions that work in very specific ways, and then when you partner with another institution, which may be bigger than you or smaller than you, say, they work in very different ways too. They pay their artists differently on a different scale than we do. There's all sorts of logistical things to be figured out, and I'm not against it at all. I just think that it requires a good amount of conversation and front-footedness in the process always, and being straightforward with each other about what you're really bringing to bear here.
David, I'd like to jump in. I'm Chip Walton from Curious Denver. I think as this becomes a wonderful wave of how we work in this sector, I think keeping a level of discernment about who you partner with and how you partner is is important, particularly in balance with what may be growing trends in the funding community, so that you don't just partner with organizations or partner on projects or with artists because of the lure of additional funding. And
Absolutely.
I know even within the National NewPlay Network, you know, we're 26 theaters and we know each other pretty well. And frankly, there are organizations inside the network that I would partner with, and there are organizations I wouldn't, not because I don't like them or I don't like their work, but because they don't work, because we work in different ways. Our organizations, just the DNA is just different. And so I think it's important to keep that in balance. And I also think, just as a little bit of a non sequitur, I think there are some interesting semantic questions as we move forward, because I know at the National NewPlay Network level, you know, we had these really fascinating and somewhat flummoxing conversations about, well, are we a network, or are we a pipeline, or are we a service organization? And so, I mean, I think on the surface it's easy to sort of say things like network or partner or things like that, but I think really digging down a little bit deeper as this becomes more of a trend is a little revelatory, actually, in terms of what your intentions and your motivations are.
But how you function is different based on, I mean, I'm hoping that we, in 3 weeks, will tell you that we're laying a pipeline for Jennifer and the program at Yale to the NNPN, but how NNPN functions when it does its showcase is a whole different thing. I mean, so, you know, there's a lot of slippage, and thank you, Mark, a lot of slippage.
I have a question here, too, about, this comes up a lot when we talk about this, that partnering leads to new sources of money, or sometimes money leads to partnering, and is often problematic in that way. What's more costly about partnering? If you're actually going to do the plays anyway, what's the requirement? I wonder if this is not perhaps part of the downside, that we're now creating a whole system and structure to support new money coming into things that actually are just the things we were already doing.
Well, Farrell Forum and Bear Arts Foundation, that depends upon why it goes back to his original statement about partnering. Everybody's been talking about partnering in production. Know thyself and know thy partner. First thing is, what do you want to do? Like, we had to ask ourselves a question. We know there's a need, and particularly a need with theaters of color and writers of color. If I had $50 million right now, I could take care of part of the need, but only part of it. There's a realization has to take place. You know, where do you want to be in 10, 20, 30 years? I'm talking about the theater I want to serve.
That's on the agenda, too.
Good. Some people answer that question. They've already been asked it by me in some places, and some people haven't. And some of those people are gone. Not because they wanted to be, but they just left us and went to another realm. So the theater had to answer the question. What are you going to do in terms of your commitment to new work? Are you going to continue to do that? Do you want to extend it? Do you want to make it larger? And since we're in this crisis of funding, it's always sexy to talk about partnerships when ain't nobody got no money. But since we're in this crisis, how are you going to do that? Now, what about these other structural problems you've got? Okay? I know you want to do new work, but what about these structural problems? Because, see, there's some theaters, and I'm talking about the theaters in my little network, who are very good at some things. Now, if I can get them together with the people who aren't so good, then they can teach each other.
And what's in the way of that, Fred?
A little bit of money, not a lot. A little bit of transportation. But that's already started. That process started before our little bit of a crisis with the economics of the situation.
I think it's an interesting question. I mean, the idea of partnership, I think what happens is that artists are functioning as a middleman between multiple organizations, and I think the idea of partnership would be to alleviate that difficulty or stress, or how many maybe 4 or 5 of us are here presenting the same play over the next 18 months, but we don't even talk to each other. So, but the artist is constantly trying to negotiate, when they're going to be in residence here, where they're going to be there. I mean, I'm looking at Trey, and I'm looking at you. It's a perfect example. We're not really talking.
And Diane.
Yeah. So I mean, if we could develop better models for partnership among the institutions, I think it would take you know, it would take a whole element out of the artistic process that is so draining and exhausting
But
for
I think-
artists. I would love to hear from an artist about that.
This is a Todd London, I love Todd. And when I started working at Penumbra, I said to him, as a freelance artist, you have no idea how expensive this thing is. The second thing you don't understand as a freelance artist is what a bad business it is. It is this is theater. It is a horrible business model, so to go into the economic thing. So then the ways in which you can reduce costs become so problematic. It is amazing to me. So the partnership thing is in part, you know, you're swimming and you're not swimming well.
No.
And you're reaching to someone who also is not swimming too well. I mean, and I don't think we deal with it. And we keep going back to the wonderful angels and we beg the foundations and we do all this stuff. It is a horrible business. And I know it's terrible because I've only been doing it in an institution for 3 years now. I say this to and I mentioned Lou Bellamy for one particular reason. We're about to enter our 35th year. And I said to him, if I started that place would be closed. And all the things he's done to keep that place open, it boggles the mind. So anybody who has, when people have issues with Lou, I'm like, you have no idea what this man has done. I'm stunned.
But this story he's telling you is not just germane to him. Because I've heard this story 10 or 15 times in more depth, okay? So what does that mean? That means